Yesterday, Anne Sacoolas has been sentenced to 8 months in prison, suspended for 12 months for causing the death of teenage motorcyclist Harry Dunn by careless driving. The former US spy was driving her Volvo on the wrong side of the road in Northamptonshire when she hit Harry, who was riding in the opposite direction. She was sentenced in an unprecedented case at the Old Bailey, but did not attend the hearing in person after American officials stepped in. Let's speak with Daw KC, barrister, writer and broadcaster. Afternoon to you, Chris. One thing I wasn't clear when I was listening to the judge at the Old Bailey summing up and then sentencing on this was the status of the sentence, bearing in mind she's in the United States. This is a British court, arguably one of the most famous courts in the world, but nonetheless, where does this sentence stand, legally speaking?
Well, she was given a suspended sentence of imprisonment with no conditions. So the sentence stands as if she'd been given that sentence in the UK, because it's not a sentence that requires her to go to prison or to spend any time in prison unless she breaks the terms of the suspension. In other words, by committing another offence in the UK, which is impossible because she won't be coming here.
Well, indeed. So she doesn't. None of what was said would apply to her if she remains in the United States, as it were.
No, well, it applies to her in the sense that it's still recorded as an English criminal record, and she still has a prison sentence on her record, a suspended sentence on her record for those purposes, and that may or may not affect her ability to travel internationally outside of the US, for example, where other countries may not allow people into their country who have serious criminal convictions of that kind. But as long as she remains in the United States, it won't have any impact on her life at all.
In terms of the sentencing of this, you're probably ahead of me on this one.
I hope so.
It's the distinction. A lot of people were saying, hang on, how do you get a suspended sentence for death by dangerous driving? And of course, that wasn't the offence, was it? The offence was careless driving, as distinct from dangerous driving, which is another offence, but the other carries a potentially greater prison sentence than careless driving.
Yeah, I can break that down very straightforwardly. So causing death by careless driving just means that someone has driven carelessly, even if it's just for a moment or two, and tragically death has resulted from that momentary act of carelessness. Causing death by dangerous driving is driving far below the standard of a reasonable motorist and causing death, and the maximum sentence for that is now life imprisonment. Yeah. So there is a large difference. The maximum sentence for the causing death by careless offence is 5 years for the absolute worst possible case. This was not considered by the judge to be anything like the worst possible case. Yes, she drove on the wrong side of the road, but that wasn't in any way reckless in the normal sense that we would understand it, because regrettably, I suspect it's a mistake that lots of people make when they're driving in another country. We just resort to instinct and drive on the side of the road we're used to driving on, and she'd only just arrived in the United Kingdom, and tragically that's the mistake that she made, and even more tragically, of course, that resulted in this young man's death.
What, of course, was, just to compound the tragedy for Harry's family, was the fact that it's taken a long, long time to get justice here, because Anne Sacoolas disappeared back after, I think, about 17 days or something, went back to the United States despite all of this going on, disappeared, claims of diplomatic immunity. Was it her? Was it her husband? Was she a diplomat? What did she do for a living, etc.? Even presidents getting involved in this, and it came really to nothing at all. Could a court have taken any of that into account when sentencing? I mean, the fact she disappeared was a bit iffy, right?
Yes, I mean, she pleaded guilty to this offence.
Only in October, though.
That's correct, but she did plead guilty. And I mean, that many who claim diplomatic immunity, and particularly those who are under the protection of a government as powerful as the United States, would have had nothing to do with this process at all and just refused to engage with it whatsoever. She didn't do that. She did engage with the process, albeit remotely, and she did plead guilty, and she did express a considerable amount of remorse in the course of the sentencing process. So I don't think it's quite as straightforward as she did a runner and showed complete contempt for the process. I think, frankly, there are lots of things going on in this case that we just don't know. We don't exactly know what her background was working for the US government. We don't know precisely whether it was in the intelligence services, and if so, in what capacity. And I just think in the absence of all of that information, the only positive that comes out of this is that at least Harry Dunn's family have now said that they feel that there has been justice. I know they're deeply upset at her conduct and the way the American government has sought to protect her, but at least they've had some sense of process and hopefully some sense of closure from what, frankly, is just an awful personal tragedy for them and their family.
Just give us your view, Chris, on this televised sentencing move that we've seen. Scotland have had it for a while. Obviously, there are certain rules that you will be aware of as a lawyer. I'm slightly aware of as a broadcaster. There's certain, even then, there's certain bits you can't show. We mentioned yesterday that we were about to cross live to the Old Bailey and then realised actually there's the first part of the summing up. There's elements in there that you can't include and can't be broadcast. The perpetrator, in this case Anne Sacoolas, can't be shown or heard, etc. Clearly, if there was a jury, nobody would expect them to be shown, and that wouldn't be the case. So all we really get is the very last bit, isn't it? Just the sentencing. Do you think that's enough? Do you think we want to see more? And is there any use in seeing what we already can see?
I think there's always a use to seeing something, and this is better than nothing. But my view for a long time has been that the public are entitled to see everything that happens in our public courts of justice. They can come along, you can come along to the Old Bailey or any other of the courts up and down the land, and you can watch every minute of what happens, except in certain very limited circumstances. And my view has been there should be camera feeds into every court in the country. Of course, you have to protect witnesses' identity and jurors' identity, but the jury should really, the public, through the camera, should be able to see exactly what you could see if you were sitting in the public gallery in court. Because let's be honest, most of us, I'm not one of them, but most people don't have the time to go to court every day or very often at all, because everyone has busy lives and jobs to do. And I think really, if you're going to have open justice should mean completely open justice. Anybody can watch any case and make your own judgment. And I think people will be a lot better informed than they are by the little snippets that we see at the moment, and in particular by the very partial reports that we often see in the press, which miss out many of the important details.
I was quite surprised that you can't show the guilty party if somebody has been found guilty. I get it, if they're found not guilty, there might be a fairly seductive argument as to why you wouldn't therefore plaster that person's face, although it doesn't always apply to newspapers and the like. But is there any specific logic you can fathom from this as to why you wouldn't show the inverted commas perpetrator?
Well, I mean, the logic is that we move in a very slow and gradual way when it comes to the acceptance of media interest and public and televisation of our court proceedings, and we move at glacial speed and with great conservatism. And I take your point. I mean, of course, there are defendants, young defendants, or those with mental health problems, and indeed those who might face vigilante attacks, for whom there is a degree of necessity to protect their identity and not show them. But I think, as I say, I think for me, if you could sit in a public gallery and watch the defendant being sentenced, you should be able to see them on camera, or sitting at home on your computer or your phone or your television.
Indeed. Chris, I was going to try and make this interview last about an hour just so I could see you standing in 0-degree temperatures. Not that I want to see a barrister in discomfort in any shape or form, of course, but we will let you go. I think you're back in the studio with us at some point soon.
I hope so. And Ian, have a good rest of the show. As always, good to speak to you.
Nice one, Chris. Thank you. Chris Daw KC, barrister, writer and broadcaster with us here on Talk TV.